Amen. We start a brand new series this morning called Be a Blessing. And I'm excited to be walking you through, especially in the first week, always the opening sermon, we lay a lot of foundation that we can build upon. And so we'll be teaching verse by verse through various stories in the coming months of summer. And this is all to prep you and to encourage you for outreach, for mission, for possibility in Arlington and in Jacksonville. It's to remind us of what God is doing in the world and how He uses us in what He's doing. After several years of both my wife and I being in back to school and raising children and now teenagers and now young adults and a dog, I have to admit our home is a bit behind in some of its maintenance projects. And I have a list that Amber and I put together at the end of last year, and this list is meant to carry me through all the way this year and getting some things done around the house. And I want to use this list as a kind of object lesson for a little bit of a lengthy introduction, but it really is going to help you have anchor points, have bullet points for what God is saying over the next several weeks. I sat down with Amber and we began brainstorming and thinking. There were all these projects that have to be done, and she had her preferences about what to do in what order, and I had some of my preferences about how to do things and what to spend on things, and we both discussed the order of this list and its priorities. So, for example, at the top, at the end of last year, was a pool leak. Guess what? That can be crossed off. I got on that one. So we're moving. The list is rolling. Then there was a number 2. The deck needed repainting. Every couple years, all that rain and sun, it just deteriorates your paint on those flat decks. So guess what? That one is, now that's several steps. Both of these things, there are several bullets and steps underneath on how to repair and what to do and figuring it out and troubleshooting and buying the right supplies. And guess what? The deck has been painted. Yes, we're moving along. Then number 3 was called the drip edge. How many of you know what a drip edge? It's the edge that comes out from under your shingles and just overlaps your fascia board at the top of the house. Well, that was constantly molding because it was painted white. And so we painted the drip edge black so that it wasn't always showing the mold. And that took several steps. I didn't even know the name drip edge. I just knew I had this aluminum metal thing up there. But I had to get on YouTube and what's this thing and can I paint it and what kind of paint do you, and we did it. It was a process, but man, it looks good. We are on number 4 right now. I'm midway through the year. I'm about midway through my list. Paint the house white. It's already painted white, but it is a lot of white going on top of white. It has to be sanded and scraped and then painted, and the weather's raining all the time and it's humid and it's hot. But guess what? I'm about 50% done painting the house white. I'm excited because there's an end in sight and it's getting a fresh coat of paint. And I could go on through this list. The old white moldy gutters had to come off. We got to raise the tree canopy before hurricane season. There's front yard plant beds that have never been done, that have to be in backyard, has to be done. And then we'll come into the inside of the house and there's a list for the inside. You say, Pastor, you're going on and on about this list and I don't really care. Well, no, I'm just kidding. I know you care. I know you're praying for me out there. Here's what I want you to learn from this list. Listen carefully. This list is, first of all, a plan to get our house in order, our physical house. Second of all, it's a multi-step plan. Third of all, it's a long-term plan. Being a multi-step plan and a long-term plan, each one of these has to be broken down and has different things contributing to it. And fourthly, it's a family plan, and Amber and I work on it together. We partner in it, and I've got to get my kids. They're out there holding the ladder for me when I'm way up high painting the top of the roof, and they are spotting me and helping me and keep this plan. And I want to draw them in and get them involved as we work on this together. This is where we begin our series, because we begin with a house that's a little bit out of order. It's God's house. It's God's creation, God's world, and it's in desperate need of maintenance because not anything that God has done, but because of the disobedience of humanity who has put things in a state of mess and disarray. That's where we begin. Genesis 6, verse 5 says, at the beginning of things, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth in God's house, so to speak. And that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 11 tells a story about what that looks like when humanity's doing its own thing and they're trying to have their own projects and their own order of things. And they've gone away from God's project and God's order. And I want to read this story to you because it sets us up for our key story. It's a comparison story. Genesis 11, verse 1 says, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. And as the people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. And they said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Now, that doesn't seem too bad. Okay, bricks are good. Humanity's moving forward. But the emphasis here is on their selves and their desires and their motivations and their abilities. Let us make bricks. And they used the bricks instead of stone and the tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build for ourselves, a city with a tower that reaches to the heaven so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the face of the earth. And God had told mankind, I want you to spread out and I want you to fill the earth. And mankind is saying, no, we don't want to be scattered. We want to do our own thing for ourselves. If you've ever had children who, when you tell them to do one thing, they do the exact opposite. And sometimes you get this feeling that they do the exact opposite just because. Right? Just because. I've never had any of those kids in my family. They do the exact opposite just to spite you in an act of rebellion, just to test you. And when we read carefully through the human story at the beginning of Genesis, this is exactly what's happening in this passage. God has told them, spread out and go fill the earth on His behalf, for His project, for His blessing and His goodness and glory. Instead, they say, come, we'll do it on our own and we'll operate from one central location and we'll show our own strength. God has repeated His instructions in the opening chapters of Genesis again and again for mankind to do His work, to be His people. And instead they say, let us build, let us do our own thing. God up to this point has been the source of blessing and the source of identity. Instead, they want to self-define. We want to be the source of our own blessing and of our own identity. We want to make a name for ourselves. And this attitude meant that the Lord would put an end to that great tower and that great project. He would confuse their language and scatter them over the face of the earth. But we sense in the heart of man this rebellion, this, in spite of what the Lord says, we say, attitude, persisting. What would the Lord do about rebellion in their hearts? Over the next few weeks, we'll look at God's desire, His plan, His mission to put His creation, His house back in order. And I want to show you, as we go, the highlights of this plan. And I want to remind you, it's a multi-step plan. We can't track down every secondary story. We've got to hit the big ones, the bullet points. The big ones. There's a lot of secondary stories and things as we go, but we will hit the big bullet points so you can see God's plan. It's a multi-step plan. Guess what? It's a long-term plan. It's a long-term plan. And guess what? It's a long-term plan because he wants to involve his human creation in his plan and in his purposes. He wants them participating in his work as he sets his house back in order, so to speak. You see, the big idea about God's plan, and sometimes in biblical studies, it's called the mission of God, God's mission and what he's doing to save the world. And sometimes when we talk about God's plan to bring about salvation in the world, we need to slow down and see the big ideas, the big bullet points of what God has done. And that's what we'll be doing. And I'm going to lay that foundation for you this week. As we begin this week, we begin with a very simple truth that will grow. We begin with this truth, and this is where we start to talk about you all and learn from the scriptures. We begin with the truth that I am called to be a blessing. I am called to be a blessing in God's plan. We discover this truth in the first bullet point, the first key moment of God putting his plan into motion, the call of Abraham. Let's look at Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1. And I understand and am fully aware that this is a kind of teaching sermon today. But this passage in Genesis chapter 12 is the beginning of telling the story of this plan for a reason. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1. Said the Lord had said to Abram, and we'll talk about his name in a minute. I'll use Abraham mostly, but it's the same person. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. And I will make you into a great nation. And I will bless you. And I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, so that all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. I am called to be a blessing, and I hope when you leave this morning, you can say that about yourself and understanding God's plan and purpose for you. That he is calling you different from the ways of the world to be a blessing. What does that mean, Pastor Chad, to be called to blessing? Number one, it means that God has taken the initiative in this plan. God has taken the initiative in his calling us to be a blessing. Now let's begin to compare these stories, right? You see, the people at the Tower of Babel, they gathered for their own purposes and their own pursuits. And they said to us, and we'll look at this text again, and as we go each point, I'll show you side by side the comparison. They said, come, let us do it. It's our initiative, it's our design. They were the source of their own calling and progress and success and future. And so their goals were always pointed inwards towards themselves, this picture of humanity. But the story of salvation is the story of God's initiative and God's calling and God's making the list and God's successes and God's future. And that begins with him. Abraham, we get this picture, he's just going about in the process of everyone else in humanity. He's part of the Babylonian kingdom, the city of Ur. He lives in this great city, Ur, in the southern Babylonian kingdom. And God appears to him, and the Lord said to him, I will make you, I will bless you, I will make your name great. And the tone is set from the beginning. That God is the one who comes and initiates his to-do list for mankind. his purposes and his ways, his goals. And when we see that he's reaching out to us with his goals, his purposes, his plans, his ways, we realize if it's about him, automatically the arrows change from pointing inward to changing and pointing towards him, don't they? He's automatically shifting the focus and the direction of by him okay, God, it's now about you. And oh, wait a minute, it's going to be about others, as we'll see in a moment. And we begin to sense that God's mission and purpose is very different because he's in charge. Guess what? You have a calling from God to find your purpose in his initiative and plans, not in your own initiative pointed inwards to your own self. One of our senior leaders of the church, Rock Rawls. Where's Rock? I don't tell. Rock, raise your hand. He's in the back here. I'm going to tell a story about you. It's one of your favorites. Rock Rawls and I laugh about the time when this church here needed a pastor. And we share this story, and I love to hear it and retell it, and he retells it. The church had a plan, right? The house needs some direction. The church house here, Arlington Assembly Destination Church. They were without a pastor, and so there was a committee put together, and they were going to start meeting every single week. And there was Bill Morrison was one of the chairs of that committee, and they had help from the denomination to steer them and keep them on the right track. And they were going to meet every week and look through resumes. And they had a set of criteria for the pastors to hire and find somebody to come in and work. And they began to put this plan in motion. Only for this plan to work, what do you need? You need resumes. You need to get the word out. You need to let people know that there's an opening and an availability. If you've ever, young singles will say in the dating game, you have to put yourself out there, so to speak. You ever heard that phrase? Well, that's what the church had to do, and Rock understood this as a leader, and he began to make some calls. And Rock's known many good pastors over the years and had good relationships with other churches, both in our area and outside of our area. And he began to make some phone calls. And one of the guys he called was my father. I didn't know anything about this church being open. But Rock calls up my father, and he says, Pastor Larry, our church is open. We're a good church. We're a healthy church. There's a lot of potential here, and we love our pastor. We've got a good board. And he says, Pastor Larry, do you have anybody on your staff that might be interested in being a senior or lead pastor one day? And Rock, I'm paraphrasing from you. Correct all the story later if you want, buddy. And my father, as I heard the story, tells Rock, I really don't, buddy, right now. I don't know of anybody on my staff that's antsy, but I'll keep my ears open for you. And of course, the word spreads that there's an available church, right? It just spreads one level up into the Carolinas. 3 days later after that phone call, right? 3 days later, I get a call from my father. He says, come on into my office. I want to talk to you for a minute. I was like, okay, I'll swing by. And we're missionaries. We were itinerating and raising support and just praying about what God would have next for us with the changes in our life. And he says, listen, I got a call. Listen to that language. He said, Chad, sit down for a moment. I want to tell you about a phone call I got. I got a call. And I said, okay, tell me about this call. He says, well, do you remember this church in Jacksonville? And I said, yeah, I've heard of it before. And he says, well, I got a call from Rock. Do you remember Rock? You've met Rock before? Yeah, I know Rock. He said, well, I got a call from Rock that they're looking for a pastor. And I said, okay, what'd you tell him? He said, I said, well, I'll keep my ears open, but immediately my dad says, I don't want to send them any of my guys, right? I don't want to give any of my workers up. And he said, and then I thought of you. I said, well, great, Dad, thanks. He said, no, I don't want to distract you from missions. We love that you're a missionary, and you've worked hard to become a missionary. He said, but it's a good opportunity. And I thought, well, maybe the Lord's stirring you up, and maybe you'll think about it. And I said, well, what should I do? He said, well, why don't you give Rock a call? And I said, okay, I'll call him back, and I'll give him a call. And here we are, 13, 14 years later, right? And Rock loves to laugh, and here's the point of the story. He loves to say, all because I made that call to your dad. The scriptures in the story of Abraham, are reminding us that there is a vacancy in God's plan. There was an opening for humanity to return and serve and know the Lord. And so God makes a call, and he says to Abraham, listen, I've got something for you that's different than the ways of this world. And it's a reminder that God takes the initiative to fill the vacancy of his calling and his purpose for humanity. And the call of Abraham, listen carefully. You're thinking, maybe you're new to the scripture. You're thinking, this is an old story. Pastor, what does this have to do with me? The call of Abraham points us ahead to Jesus Christ, through whom God says to all of us, I have a plan for you to know me and to serve me, and he's calling you through the gospel of Jesus Christ to be a blessing to his world. Jesus tells a parable about himself. It's a parable about a manager over a harvest, a manager over the vineyards. And this Lord of the vineyards, he's so interested in connecting and getting people involved in his plan and his purpose. It says that he goes out at 9 in the morning and he goes to the workers, and there's the city. The city's hustling and bustling and it's doing its own thing, but the vineyard owner's got a plan, and he goes at 9 and he finds some people standing around. He says, what are you doing standing around? Come on, work for me. And they get hired. He goes back at 12 o'clock and he says to more people standing, what are you doing in this plan of your day and this city and it's hustling? But come on, work for me in my vineyards. He goes back at 3 o'clock, and he goes back at the very end of the day at 5 o'clock with only an hour, and he says, come on, what are you doing standing around? And they say, well, sir, no one's hired us. No one's called us. We've been waiting. And the Lord of the vineyard says, I'm calling you. I'm hiring you. Come and serve me. Come and work for me, and I will give you your fair reward and your wages for working for me. Jesus is still calling us today into God's plan. And it's a calling and tradition that goes all the way back to Abraham. And as amazing as that is, there's more. Number 2, God blesses us as we work for him, as we serve him, as we trust him, as we respond faithfully to him. God blesses us so that in his plan, you will be a blessing to his world and to his people. You'll remember in last week's Father's Day message, we talked about calling and naming, and how it's symbolic of identity and purpose, how it's symbolic of the memory of someone and living on into the future through reputation and through your renown. You see it come up again in the story of Babel. Humanity says, let us make a name for ourselves. We're going to build this tower. We're going to build this, we're going to do our plans so that we can have memory, renown, future, so that we won't be forgotten from the face of the earth. Let us do it for ourselves. The problem with making our own fortune, though, is that it cannot last. It cannot last because it's driven inward. It's driven by the self. Its arrows point just to us, and that can't last, can it? But in the story of Abram, we see this also reversed by God as well. Later on, God will change Abram's name to Abraham to signify the transformation in his life. But in this great passage in Genesis chapter 12, God tells Abram, you're not going to make a name for yourself. No, there's a new plan. If you're following me and you're trusting in me, I will make your name great. And God is saying to Abram, he is eternal. And because he is eternal, he is the one that can secure identity and future and remembrance and greatness, because it's anchored in something other than ourselves. And because it's anchored in something other than ourselves, because it's God's calling and God's initiative for blessing God's world, guess what? There's a change of focus, not in towards me, Chad, but outward towards God and outward towards mankind, to be a blessing in his creation and to the nations for his glory. So take a look and listen carefully to this reversal, not only in Abram's transformation of calling a name, but in the direction. So that language. What's the purpose of blessing? I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. That's the purpose. And he says, and I will bless those who bless you, so that I'm going to multiply it in your life, so that all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Abraham is the recipient of God's blessing so that he can be the channel, the vessel, the conduit for divine blessing to flow to others and ultimately to the nations. This is a transformation passage from the ways of fallen humanity to the ways of God. And this passage transitions Abram the man to Abraham the means for God's blessing to the world. Again, you might think, well, but Pastor Chad, Abraham's story, it's pretty unique. It's remarkable, it's old, but is it really applicable to me today? I would say yes, because again, we find this same concept repeated for the followers of Jesus Christ. In fact, there are close parallels to Abraham's call to forsake all and to trust and follow God, so close that it's almost repeated by Jesus to his own disciples. You see, Jesus envisions the fulfillment of Genesis 12 in and through his followers. And so it says this in Matthew 4 and verse 19. Jesus, he's calling out to Peter and Andrew, isn't he? And he says to them, come. Don't come and gather to yourselves and build a monument to yourself. No, it's not to a place, but to a person. Come and follow me, and I will make. Listen, this is a direct echo of Genesis chapter 12. We rush over it because it's such a common memory verse, but Jesus says, I will make you something new. I'm going to make you not fishing unto yourself for your own fortunes and your own survival. I'm going to make you fishers of men for the blessing of the kingdom of God, which is filling the earth right now through me. I will make. Their fishing, their purpose, their stewardship over their lives was terminally directed inward. But in following Jesus, they're called to a new trust, a new direction, a new purpose in their lives, to live for his mission, his purpose and plan to be a blessing, sharing the gospel and catching men for God. You say, Pastor, it's a big jump from Abraham to Jesus to me. Let me share with you a little story that I think will help you with this jump. In the height of the art world, for people who understand classical piano, and I do not, and how important it is, your style and your emotion and all that stuff, your technique, teachers can actually establish a teaching lineage back to some of the most important classical pianists in all history. For example, Ludwig van Beethoven, he took lessons from Haydn and Mozart. Beethoven gave lessons to a famous pianist named Carl Czerny. Carl Czerny gave lessons to a promising and handsome young man named Franz Liszt. And long before there was Beatlemania, Liszt was so popular and considered so handsome the ladies would swoon, they had a name over his appearances, a nickname, Listomania. You've heard of Beatlemania. Well, they stole Beatlemania from Listomania. True. Strapping young man in a suit. It's like he's got his chin up like he knows he's the stuff, right? Pretty popular, playing piano. It was like, classical piano at one time was like the rock and roll, right? They got excited. Liszt tutored a man named Emil von Sauer. And von Sauer, the last surviving pupil or student of Liszt, he influenced a man named Andor Foldes, who was on all the records in the early 1900s for classical music. If you've been at a garage sale in Jacksonville, you'll see all these old records and all these people you never heard of. Well, he was one of them. A story is told about Andor at age 16. How he was struggling personally and facing issues. Foldes was there, and von Sauer had appeared to him at his school, came to the school, and asked Foldes, hey, I want you to play for me. Okay, you're struggling, you're 16, you've got talent, you've got potential. But von Sauer tells Foldes, I want you to sit down and play for me. So they get into a room, and Foldes begins playing. And Foldes he begins to choose some of the most difficult music in all of piano, piece after piece, and plays for what seemed like over an hour. He's just playing, and his mentor is listening. His mentor is listening. And at the end, a discouraged Foldes, he stops playing, and he looks at his mentor, and he waits for a response in his discouragement. And as the story goes, as Foldes tells the story, von Sauer stands up and walks over to him, and grabs his head and kisses him on the forehead. And he says, my son, when I was your age, I became a student of Liszt. And Liszt kissed me on the forehead also, saying to me, take good care of this kiss. It comes from Beethoven himself. And the implication was that Beethoven had kissed Karl, and Karl had kissed Liszt, and Liszt had kissed von Sauer. And now von Sauer said to Foldes, yes, you're receiving the kiss of Beethoven. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. This half of it is true. Foldes was alive. He told this story about being kissed on the forehead. You say, Pastor, how does it go from Abraham to Jesus to me? Listen, because this is the heartbeat of the message today, and we can go to the next slide. When Jesus calls you, come and follow me, and he gives you the promise of transformation. He says, and I will make you. And he gives you an outward, renewed mission and purpose for the blessings and the glory of God. Not only are you receiving the tutelage of Jesus, you become a living extension of his expertise and his composition in the world. You are being kissed with the blessing of God that goes all the way back to Abraham himself. Number 3, God expects a faithful response. The scriptures say that the place of the tower that the people were building was known as Babel, because it was there that the languages of the people were confused. The word Babel in the Old Testament is frequently interchangeable with the word Babylon, the great city that is throughout all the Bible. And it's there symbolically. It's a land, a city, it's a kingdom that represents the fallenness of humanity, the unfaithful ways of the kingdoms of this world. They were focused on Babylon. But God tells Abraham, go from your country, which was in Babylon, in the kingdom. Go from there to the land I will show you. And so Abram went, he obeyed as the Lord told him. Jacksonville's a really transient city, and there's people moving in and out all the time. And I don't know about you, but whenever I have moved to a new place, I like to take a little look at where I'm going. I like to see, and with all the technology today, we get on, we look at the photos, right? I pull the map out, we look at the restaurants, the schools, the amenities of the town or the city. If you want to do a deeper dive, you pull up your Zillow, you see photos of houses online, and Zillow's got all these fancy search boxes. And I'd love to picture Abraham getting his things packed together and saying to his family, hey, let's check the Zillow. Maybe he gets the kids to help him out a little bit. And in Zillow, there's, a filter where you can say if you want a house with 4 bedrooms or 3 or 2, you can filter it so you just are looking at those things for sale. And I love to picture Abraham saying, you know what, we need acres. Yes, acres. Check the acres box. At least 5 acres. Oh, good for tents and herds. Check that box. Wells are really important in water. Find us something with water, near water. Well, there is, a river, the Jordan there, but, Father Abraham, I don't know about, what if we can't get close to the Jordan? Find one that's got a lot of wells. Let's get some wells nearby. Okay, yeah, we can do that. Check box. How about wives for a lonely son? If there was a filter that said, great potential here for offspring and future. Check that box. Room for relatives. Make sure there's enough space. And they couldn't find any there. He and Lot eventually split up, so they didn't get that in their wish list. But how many of you know it was even more radical than that? Abraham must go by faith and not by sight. He's not going to know what's around the next corner. He's not going to know the land he's going to. He's not going to know. It's the land that the Lord will show him. And this is the nature of obedience for us today. When we hear the word of the Lord, we're to trust his ways and his direction. We're to move forward with our lives by faith and not by sight. And so the scriptures commend Abraham saying in Hebrews 11 verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went. Hebrews 11 talks about how they didn't know always where they were going. And they were looking for something, and they didn't even always know exactly what they were looking for because their hearts were drawn to a God who was making a different kind of city and heritage and future. He was a builder for them, it says in Hebrew, making their future and their way and their purposes. And just now in these verses, we're beginning to unlock the meaning of blessing in our life. Next week we'll go to Moses, the next step in that chart. And then after that we'll look at David. And then eventually we'll get to Jesus and his disciples. And then eventually we will get to us in the early church, in the New Testament church. And we will see how this calling is passed down all the way through the scriptures. That the purpose to be a blessing to God and to people around me is my purpose today. And in these passages we'll unlock this thing about purpose and mission. And you see today so many, and I'll close with this thought, so many are hungry and searching for meaning and mission in life. We'll go to the Jacksonville Jaguars game, and it never fails. When I leave that place, I think to myself, and I love sports, I love football, but I think to myself, for so many who are lost, this is their church. It's their mission. It's their calling. The next trade, the next advancement, the next excitement over their team. And we could go from thing to thing to thing in our society, in our world. People are looking, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? What can I give myself to? The problem, as Abraham is teaching us, is that if we start with a meaning that's self-focused and inward and terminal, if we say, let us build for ourselves, this blessed life, we will lose. Because God has set his plan in motion, calling us and desiring to bless us with the purpose, not inward, but outward, to be a blessing. If you're saying, Pastor Chad, does my life have meaning? Does it have meaning? I would answer to you, yes, because Jesus is calling your name. Follow me. If you're saying, Pastor Chad, does my life have purpose? Does it have purpose? What can I learn, Pastor Chad, about my purpose? Sometimes we want to jump and we think our purpose is to put on a superhero cape and to save somebody's life. And surely that must be God's divine purpose for me. All these days and all that practice was just to save this life. And I took that CPR class years ago and I saved a person's life. And we thought, oh, I made the news and that's my purpose. That's what God. No, that's not how purpose works in the scriptures. That's how it works in superhero flicks and fantasy. God's purpose for you is to live and steward your life and your family and your work and your church and the relationships and the people and neighborhoods around you for his blessing in the world. So if you say, Pastor, does my life have purpose? Abraham would say, yes, you are called to be a blessing. You are called to be a blessing. You're saying, Pastor, what can I do to respond? You need to begin like Abraham to hear that call and say, yes, Lord Jesus, I will follow and serve you. I will understand your word for my life and your ways for my life and your character for my life. And I will begin to set you as my destination and my course for all things in my life. Pastor Jesse is coming, and I want you to stand up with me.
Thank you for watching our video. If you liked it, share it with a friend and subscribe to our channel. We go live every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also support us by clicking the Give button. This allows us to continue to impact our community as well as help missions across the globe with the love of Jesus Christ. Thanks again for watching.